This week we are studying Parshas Chayei Sara. The Parsha of Chayei Sara, the Shabbos of Parshas Chayei Sara, has a couple of other names. They sometimes refer to it as Shabbos Chevron. The reason for that is, of course, because the Torah talks about Avram Avinu purchasing the Me'oras HaMachpelah in Chevron over the years. Many times this Shabbos, Parshas Chayei Sara, many thousands of Jews would go and spend Shabbos in Chevron and try to daven over Shabbos in the Me'oras HaMachpelah, and as many Jews as possible would try to hear the Torah reading, the story of how Avram Avinu purchases this place for the burial of his wife. Of course, Adam and Chava had already been buried there from beforehand. They tried to hear the Torah reading of this in the actual Me'oras HaMachpelah itself, in the very place where they're buried. But it's also, the Parsha of Chayei Sara is also known as Parshas HaShiduchim. And the reason for that is because the Torah really talks about the first shidduch that's recorded in the Torah. Really, the first time the Torah really gets into a story about a shidduch and how it happened. And there was a shadchan, and there was money involved, and there was negotiation, and there was a young man, and there was a young woman, and you know, all of the stuff that goes into making and facilitating a shidduch. For the first time really appears in this Parsha, with a story where Avraham Avinu sends his servant, who, by the way, is not mentioned by name anywhere in the Parsha, not once. He's only referred to as Eved Avram, the servant of Avram. So but the Torah is, of course, referring to Eliezer, as the commentaries explain. Eliezer is dispatched to go with specific instructions to go and find and bring a shidduch for Yitzchak, who at this stage is about 40 years old. He's a young, handsome bachelor, and he's ready to get married. And they go and they find Rivka, which according to, again, some of the opinions of the Chazal, at this stage is a young woman, strapping young woman. She's 3 years old. And she is brought to marry Yitzchak. At the end of the Parsha, the Torah says they got married. Yitzchak marries her, Yitzchak loves her. And in the end of the Parsha, the Torah even concludes with saying that Yitzchak is comforted for the loss of his mother, about which the Torah speaks in the beginning of the Parsha. But because there are so many details articulated, and the Torah seems to spare no effort to describing the story of how this shidduch came about. So it's known also as Parshas HaShiduchim, and in fact, it is brought down that there is a segula for those who seek a shidduch to say the Parshas HaShiduchim, I think every day for 40 days. I'm not familiar exactly with the details. Be it as it may, it's this week's Parsha. Okay, what is the story? Very briefly, because of course you all know the story. Avraham Avinu decides it's time to marry off his son. 40 years old, living in his father's basement, shon, sight. So he calls Eliezer, his faithful servant, and he gives him really only one instruction. And the instruction he gives him, if you'd like to follow along here, the story starts in the beginning of Perek Chav Dalet, chapter 24. He calls his servant and he makes him swear. He makes him swear that he's not going to facilitate the shidduch between his son and one of the B'nois HaKnani, one of the Canaanite women. Ki el artzi vel moiladati telech. Avram insists, I'd like you to go to my land, to my birthplace, and retrieve the shidduch for my son Yitzchak from there. Very clear. Okay, and he makes Eliezer swear. And the Eved, Eliezer, has only one question. The only question he has, he doesn't ask who's going to pay for the trip. He doesn't ask if I'm going to travel first class. He doesn't ask how long I need to be there, how long is this going to take, who's going to take care of things while I'm away. Nothing. He's a very faithful servant. He's going to follow the instructions. His only question is, what if the woman, the particular woman, I guess, that Avraham Avinu has in mind, what if the woman doesn't want to come back with me, Eliezer asks, here to marry Yitzchak? What do I do then? Shall I take Yitzchak to where the young woman is? Because, of course, Avram is sending him back to his own birthplace. So he says to Avram, what if the woman doesn't want to come back here to marry Yitzchak? Should I take Yitzchak there? Absolutely not, Avram Avinu says. Under no circumstances. Hashem will make you successful, and the woman will want to come with you. And if she doesn't want to come, you're absolved of my oath. Which, again, according to many commentaries, means he would be absolved of the entire mission. So the mission is to go and retrieve the woman, to find her. She is living in Avraham Avinu's birthplace, and bring her here to marry Yitzchak. If she doesn't want to come, forget about it. Then just leave it alone. You are absolved. Okay. Then, of course, Eliezer goes. He arrives in the city. He goes to the well. He offers that famous tefillah to Hashem. He says, Hashem, look, I don't want to interview 1,000 girls until I find the right one, and et cetera, et cetera. Of course, at this stage, Avraham Avinu is incredibly wealthy, and he's promised all of his wealth to Yitzchak. Eliezer is carrying a document in which it says that Abraham promises all of his wealth to Yitzchak. Yitzchak is a strapping young man. He's wealthy, he's charismatic, he's good-looking, he's an eligible bachelor. So Eliezer says, "Oy, Gevalt, am I going to weed through a gazillion women until I find the right one?" He asks Hashem to help him find the right one. What's the deal? He says, "I'm going to go over to her. I'm going to ask her for water. And if she offers water for me and for the camels, then she's the right one." And as soon as he finishes davening, a woman comes out and he notices her straight away. And he goes over to her and he asks her for water. And she gives him water. She gives the camels water. And he asks her who she is. And it turns out that she is related. She is of the family of Avraham Avinu. The daughter of Besuel. The daughter of Besuel. Besuel was the son of Milcah, who is the child of Nocher. Nocher, of course, is the brother of Avraham Avinu. And this is Avraham Avinu's flesh and blood. Okay. So he gives her the jewelry, and he makes his intentions very clear. He goes home with the woman, and here we discover that her father is Besuel, her brother is Lavan, who's going to play a central theme here in the future of the Jewish people. The woman's brother is Lavan, her name is Rivka, and they welcome him into the house, and they offer him something to eat, as is the custom. And the servant of Avraham Avinu says, "Lo yoichal, I won't eat until I adim dibarti dvoroi, until I can tell you what it is that's going on," and they tell him to talk. And then the Torah repeats the entire story again. How Avraham Avinu is very wealthy, and he has a son, and it's time for a shidduch for the son of the wealthy Avraham. And Eliezer says, "Avraham, my master summoned me, and he asked me to go and find the shidduch for Yitzchak. And he told me where to go. And he told me to find, and he told me to bring the woman back home to marry Yitzchak. And I said to Avram," says the servant, "I said to my master, what if the woman doesn't want to come back with me? What if the woman doesn't want to come back with me to Yitzchak?" And my master said, "If that's the case, shall I bring Yitzchak to the woman?" And my master said, "Absolutely not. If she refuses to go back with you, you're absolved of my oath." And again, the understanding is that the entire mission is absolved. And he tells the family how he traveled and how he came to the well and he davened and he asked Hashem that he should find the right woman, and the woman Rivka came out and he asked her for water and she gave the camels water, Agan, Sezach, and he presents the Torah repeats the whole story twice with all of the details. And when he's done, he says to them, "Okay, and now family members of my master, tell me, are you giving me the woman to take back with me to my master? Yes or no? If yes, we go. And if not, I'm absolved of this mission and I can leave." Vayan Lavan and Besuel, the pasuk says, the Torah says, pasuk nun, Lavan and Besuel respond. Lavan, the child, responds before the father. Vayan Lavan, the Gemara says, because of that he was a Rosha, because he spoke before his father. Lavan and Besuel said, quote, "May Hashem yotza hadover." They said, "This is unbelievable. This is from God." Lavan and Besuel, this is from Hashem. There's nothing we can say, nothing bad, nothing good. Here is Rivka, off you go. Of course, the next morning they change their minds, or at least Lavan changes his mind. Eliezer presents it so well that when he's done, the family accepts it and they say, "This is from Hashem," and there's nothing we can say, nothing we can do. All right, the story is very famous, and you all heard it, and that's what it is in a nutshell. Here, there is a fascinating nuance which the rabbis catch. here, which the rabbis catch, in Perek Chof Daled, Pasuk Lametes, chapter 24, verse 39. Again, this verse is taken from the words that Eliezer, that the servant, speaks to the family of Rivka, to the family of the bride, telling them the whole story of how he got there. He starts all the way from the beginning of when Avram employs him to be his ambassador to go and find the Shidduch. And he speaks of his question to Avram Avinu, what shall I do? In other words, he's repeating to the family of Rivka the question that he asked Avraham, what shall I do if the woman does not want to come with me back to where Avram and Yitzchak live? Shall I bring Yitzchak to the woman? And Avram said no. And the pasuk says like this. And I, says Eliezer, says the servant of Avram, said to my master Avram, quote, perhaps the woman will be unwilling to come back with me, to come back to Eretz Yisrael, to come back to where Avram and Yitzchak are living. What if she doesn't want to come with me? Maybe she doesn't want to come. And Eliezer says, Avram said to me, Hashem will grant you success, and you'll be able to bring her back. And if not, you're absolved from the entire thing. What's the nuance that the rabbis catch here? So again, the question that Eliezer asks Avram, perhaps the woman will not want to come back with me. The question is recorded in the Torah twice. The first time when the Torah speaks about Avram talking to Eliezer, and the second time when Eliezer repeats the story to the family. The one difference is that the word ulai, which means perhaps, as in the context, perhaps the woman will not want to come back with me to Eretz Yisrael. The word perhaps is spelled differently. The first time the word ulai, when Eliezer speaks to Avram, and the Torah first tells the story about the conversation itself between Avram and Eliezer, the word ulai is spelled aleph, vav, lamed, yud, ulai perhaps. The second time when Eliezer is repeating the story to the family of Rivka, the word ulai is spelled without a vav, no vav. Instead of aleph, vav, lamed, yud, it's aleph, lamed, yud. Again, the meaning is the same, ulai, but the vav is missing. Say the rabbis. What happened to the vav? So Rashi quotes this. Ulai le'teilach isha, says Rashi, the word ulai, when you read it without a vav, can read not as ulai, but elai. Ulai means perhaps, elai means to me. What does that mean? Says Rashi, Bas Hoysaloi Eliezer. Eliezer had a daughter. Eliezer had a daughter. He was looking for some pretense. He was looking for some excuse. He was looking for some pretense, for some way, for some path, for some opening to arrange a shidduch between his master's son Yitzchak and Eliezer's own daughter. So when he says to Avram Avinu, perhaps the girl won't want to come with me to Eretz Yisrael, he doesn't only mean perhaps, says Rashi, but the word ulai, perhaps written without a vav, can mean a lie to me. Eliezer says, wait a second. You're sending me out of the country to find you a girl for your son? A lie. I also have a girl. I want my Yitzchak to marry my daughter. So again, the understanding here, at least the simple understanding in Rashi, is that Eliezer is not saying it outright because he's a faithful servant. He doesn't tell Avram Avinu, I want my daughter to marry you. It doesn't say that. But he hints it. He says ulai. But he says ulai in such a way that there's no vav. So it can read as elai, as if to say, all right, Avram and Eliezer are talking to each other. They're not writing words. But the Torah writes it this way to tell us that there was an undercurrent in the words of Eliezer where he's hoping and he's wishing and he's looking for a way to like a good shadchan, to slip it in that he wants his own daughter to marry her. And apparently Avram Avinu was sensitive to this. And he can tell that Eliezer has a different interest here, and he's looking at, in Yiddish we say, kricht. Kricht means he's looking for a way to facilitate the shidduch with his own daughter. Omar loy Avram. So Avram says to his servant, B'ni Baruch, my son is blessed. Va'ata orur, and you are cursed. Ve'ein orur mistabek b'Baruch. And orur and Baruch don't make a good shidduch. Baruch and Baruch, or Baruch and Bracha make a fantastic shidduch. Orur and Orur, a curse and a curse make a fantastic shidduch. But Baruch and Orur, Baruch means blessed, Orur means cursed. One who is blessed and one who's cursed, not a good shidduch. All right? If any of you are ever read a shidduch, if any of you ever presented with a shidduch for one of your children, and you're looking for a really polite way to get out of it, you say, look, my child is blessed and your child is cursed. And I don't think it's a good idea for a cursed child for a blessed child to marry a cursed child. Not a good shidduch. All right, Avraham Avinu doesn't mince his words here. He tells Eliezer, I am blessed, you are cursed. Blessings and curses don't mix. So there's not going to be a shidduch between my children and your children. Avraham Avinu shut it down. Avraham shut it down. Okay. But, again, Rashi's point here is, the word ulai, perhaps, is still written without the vav because it lends itself to be understood in such a way that we can know that Eliezer had his own ulterior motive here, that there was something that his own ulterior selfish motive that he wanted really for himself. It never materialized because Avraham Avinu shut it down. It wasn't meant to be, but still it's left there in the Torah to show us that Eliezer wanted this. And if Avraham Avinu, in fact, had not shut it down, had not rejected it, who knows? Perhaps Yitzchak would have married Eliezer's daughter. This is what's written here in Rashi. Okay, now let's ask a couple of questions. Some of them very obvious, some of them a little more nuanced. Let's break it down really into three questions. First of all, Avraham Avinu is supposed to be a man of kindness. He's supposed to be a man of benevolence. I mean, he was kind and hospitable to Arabs who worshipped the dirt in their feet. You want to turn a shidduch down, you want to tell somebody no, there's a way to say no. There's a way to tell somebody this shidduch is not right for me. There's a way to tell somebody, I don't think it's suitable for my son, without making somebody else feel like a piece of dirt. Why did Avraham Avinu have to say it that way? My son is blessed and you are cursed? Why? What did Avraham Avinu even mean? What was the curse of Eliezer? On a simple level, what that means is that Eliezer was a descendant of Canaan. Noach, if you remember from Parshas Noach, Noach has a son, as a descendant called Canaan, from his son Chom. So Eliezer was from the descendants of Canaan. Canaan was from the descendants of Chom. Chom was cursed by Noach. After Noach got drunk, after the flood, which we spoke about 2 or 3 weeks ago, so Chom defaces his father, and Noach curses him. And Eliezer was a descendant of that. So Avraham Avinu said, I'm not interested. You're cursed. Okay, fine. That's what Avraham meant. But why? Why the need to be so dismissive? Why the need to be so rude? Why the need to be so condescending? My son is blessed and your child is cursed. I mean, what? Just say no. Who was it that said that, right? Just say no. Say no, not a good shidduch. I don't think they're suitable. They're not going to bring each other happiness and peace and love for the rest of their life. It's not going to work. I don't think so. Right? I heard there was a Rosh Yeshiva once wanted to turn down a shidduch. So they came to him for a child or for a student of his, whatever it was. He wanted to turn down a shidduch. But the shadchan who was presenting the shidduch was got in this case, and he was telling him, she's a wonderful girl, she's a wonderful girl, she's a wonderful girl. So eventually the Rosh Yeshiva said, look, milchix is wonderful, and fleishix is wonderful. If you put them together, you get a disaster. What's wrong? You say, but the milchix is wonderful, the milchix is wonderful. The fleishix is wonderful, the fleishix is wonderful. Put them together, disaster. Why? Because not all two wonderful things do well together when you put them together. Sometimes it creates havoc. So Avraham Avinu could have said to Eliezer, listen, it's not a good shidduch. And even if Avraham Avinu believed that because of Eliezer's yichus and because he was a descendant of Canaan, who was a descendant of Chom, who was cursed by Noach, therefore he actually was cursed. Why do you have to say that? Why the need? What point was he trying to make? That's question number one. Question number two. Eliezer was cursed. Avraham sees Eliezer as a cursed human being because his yichus, because his great-grandfather was Canaan, who comes from Chon. Therefore, Avraham Avinu sees him as cursed. Who was Eliezer? Eliezer was loyal with his very life to Avraham Avinu. He went to battle, literally risking his life for Avraham Avinu, spent his entire life dedicated to teaching the whole world the Torah of Avraham Avinu. And when push comes to shove, even here, Eliezer's going and he's picking up the right shidduch for Yitzchak. He's doing the right thing. Now you wake up to tell me after all these years of service, now you wake up to tell me that you think I'm a curse? Why didn't you tell me that when I spent my entire life slaving away from you, for you? And what did Eliezer do that was so terrible? Dedicated his life to serving Avraham Avinu. What kind of problem, what kind of issue does Avraham Avinu have? First question is, even if he has an issue, why does he need to tell him? And second of all, what's the problem with Eliezer? Seems like a loyal, faithful servant who spent his life, risking his life, dedicated and toiling to be the Eved of Avraham. He introduces, when he introduces himself to the family of Rivka, there's an amazing pasuk here. The pasuk says, Vayomer, and he said, Eved Avraham Anochi. Such humility, such dedication. I am an Eved Avraham. Why does Avraham consider that? Why does Avraham see that as a curse? And then let's ask one more question. The word ulai perhaps is written in the Torah without a vav. It's written in the Torah without a vav because Eliezer had an ulterior motive. He wanted the shidduch for himself. And Avraham Avinu realized that. Avraham Avinu hinted that. So therefore it's written, the word that's written in the Torah is elai. And here the commentaries ask another question. They say why the word ulai appears in the Parsha twice. Once when the conversation actually happens between Avram and Eliezer, and once when Avram repeats the conversation to Rivka's family. Why does the Torah leave out the vav when Eliezer is repeating the story to Rivka's family? It seems that the wrong place. The vav should have been left out when Avram and Eliezer are talking to each other. And Eliezer says, what if the woman doesn't want to come with me? Over there, the Torah should have left out the vav to say that Eliezer was insinuating that he wants the shidduch for his own daughter. Because that's according to the Rashi, that's what happened. Eliezer, in the conversation between Avram and Eliezer insinuated he wants the shidduch for his daughter. And Avram shut it down. He told him, you're a curse. But that story actually happened not when Eliezer repeated the story to Rivka's family. It happened when Avram and Eliezer were talking. So when Avram and Eliezer are talking over there's no zeicher, there's no remnant, there's no hint to it. Only later, when Eliezer repeats the story to the family, does the Torah then drop the bomb, ulai without a vav, elai, to tell you, Eliezer really wanted the shidduch for himself. Now you wake up to tell me this? It's not even relevant now. Now the whole thing is finished. It seems that the Torah should have put this hint, should have dropped this tidbit of insight that Eliezer wanted the shidduch with his own daughter and Avraham Avinu shut it down. That should have been placed in the initial conversation between Avram and Eliezer, because that's where it's relevant. Not later when the Torah tells us how Eliezer repeats the whole story to Rivka's family. Over there, the Torah wakes up to tell us, Eliezer really wanted the shidduch for himself. How is that relevant? How is that relevant now? Okay, so those are the three questions. Number one, why did Avram Avinu have to be so harsh? Number two, what was the curse that Avram Avinu was referring to when he spoke about Eliezer? And number three, why does the Torah tell us this? Why does the Torah not tell us this when it actually happened, but only later when Eliezer repeats the story to the family of Rivka, does the Torah tell it to us then? Okay, there are many, many answers to these questions. I want to go through, if we have time, 3 or 4 of them today, and draw some insight and see what kind of lessons we can learn from all of this. So one insight that I read, actually, a very pragmatic insight was somebody wrote, one of the commentaries writes, that Eliezer was doing what we call a sales pitch. So if any of you have ever gone to, if you've ever had an encounter with a salesman or a salesperson, so they're trying to sell you stuff, right? They're trying to sell you mouthwash. They're trying to sell you a car. They're trying to sell you window shades, whatever they're trying to sell. So they start telling you how wonderful this thing is, right? Oh, this car, it can drive forward, it can drive backwards, it can drive on its head, it can drive on its side. It doesn't use up any gas. It drives only on ruchnias, and you'll never have to clean it, and it smells so beautiful. And if you roll down the windows, you feel like you're at the beach. And this car is gewaldig. Okay, so amazing. You should spend $175,000 on this car because it's just so incredible. All right. They sell you and they sell you and they sell you. But people are not always so ready to buy and bite. First of all, sometimes you have to invest a lot of money in this particular product. And second of all, how do you know if what the person is telling you is true? Maybe they're pulling a fast one on you. I mean, definitely. Maybe they sell in Yiddish, there's such an expression. Or they say verkauf lokshen, right? Verkauf lokshen means selling noodles, selling pasta. How do I know what's inside the box? If I can't open it, I can't. All right, so take it for a test drive. But even a test drive, how much can you tell from a test drive? At some point, a good salesman will lean forward and tell you, if they're selling you a car, for example, tell you, this car is my favorite car. I actually own this car. I bought this car myself. Or even better, they'll say to you, listen, if you don't want to buy this car or this particular whatever it is that they're selling, I'm going to buy it myself. I want it myself personally. So I have to offer you first rights to buy it. But if you don't want it, I just want you to know I'm going to take it myself. Now this is highly manipulative. Of course, when a salesman tells it to you, it's a complete lie. But it's very, very effective because what they're really telling you is, I believe in this product enough to buy it myself. For whatever reason, I have to offer you first rights. But if you don't take it, I'm going to take it. That's how much I believe in this product. That's how much I'm ready to put my money where my mouth is. I so believe that it's worth this amount of money that I'm prepared to buy it myself. I have to offer you first rights. So if you don't take it, I'm going to take it. So the commentary is right. This is one answer. This is one of the reasons why Eliezer tells the family a lie. In other words, Eliezer tells the family, look, I'm not just showing up here with empty promises. I'm not just showing up here with a story. I'm not just showing up here telling you, oh, there's an eligible bachelor who lives far away and he's looking for a shidduch. And you're looking at me going, how do I know if I can believe what this guy's saying? Eliezer says, I'm not selling you lokshen here. I'm selling you a shidduch. You don't want it? I don't mind if you don't, right? As the salesman tells you, you don't want to buy it? Make my day. Don't buy it. If you don't buy it, I'll buy it. Eliezer tells the family, you don't want it? I want it for myself. Please, Eliezer says, make my day. Tell me no. I can go back to Avraham Avinu and say it didn't work. Now will you reconsider? Now will you allow me to make the shidduch between your son and my daughter? Who knows? Maybe then Avraham will say yes. So the commentaries say Eliezer bedafka. He's doing his mission. He's doing his mission so well. He's being both honest and effective. He's telling them, look, this is the truth. The truth is, I hope you're going to say no because then I get to say yes. When the family hears that, they go, oh my God, this guy's for real. Very effective salesman. All right, insight number one. It's actually a really nice insight. Makes sense. Next, insight number two. This one comes from a commentary in Rashi called Mizrahi, Rabbi Eliyahu Mizrahi. Rabbi Eliyahu Mizrahi writes something, I think it's incredibly observant. Incredibly observant. He says, if you turn back a couple of verses, the family of Rivka welcomes Eliezer to their home. Lavan, in fact, I believe it was Lavan himself who runs out. Yeah, Lavan runs out to welcome Eliezer. He sees the jewelry. he hears the story from Rivka. When he comes out, he sees Eliezer standing there by the camels. Pasuk Lamed Aleph, verse 31 says, Vayomer, Lavan tells Eliezer, Boy, Baruch Hashem. Boy, Baruch Hashem. Come, he who has been blessed by Hashem. Lavan welcomes Eliezer into the home and refers to him as an individual who is blessed by Hashem. So as soon as Eliezer hears that, Eliezer says, wait a second. Avraham Avinu rejected the Shidduch. Avraham Avinu said no, because I'm a descendant of Canaan and Chom, who was cursed by Noach. But if you, a member of Avraham Avinu's family, are referring to me as one who's been blessed by Hashem, Boy Baruch Hashem, says Eliezer, if that's the case, then I want the Shidduch. The only reason why it was turned down, Avraham Avinu says, my son is blessed and your daughter is cursed. We can't make a Shidduch between a blessing and a curse. But now says Eliezer that you've blessed me, you've declared me as one who is Baruch Hashem. Now I want the Shidduch. That's the way the Mizrahi explains it. Of course, the question there remains, in that case, why Taka didn't the Shidduch happen? The Mizrahi stops there. It doesn't explain anymore. But it does answer beautifully why the word ulai is written without a vav when the story is repeated, because now it seems there's no longer any response. Eliezer says, now I want the Shidduch. I'm now blessed by Hashem as well. That's answer number 2. The Kotzker Rebbe, Reb Menachem Mendel of Kotsk, gave what I believe is the most famous answer to this question. And his insight is it's profound, even from a psychological perspective, from understanding human nature and how it works. Says the Kotzker Rebbe, this is quoted in many, many places. Says the Kotzker Rebbe, I'll tell you why the Torah says the word ulai without a vav, elai, when Eliezer repeats the story. You know why? He says, I'll tell you. I'll tell you why. Because Eliezer himself had an ulterior motive. Eliezer wanted to sabotage the mission. Eliezer wanted the Shidduch for his own daughter. No, so what's the problem? Says the Kotzker Rebbe, Eliezer wanted to sabotage the mission, but his motives, his ulterior motives, I'm using my own words, his ulterior motives were subconscious. He wasn't standing there consciously going, I don't want this to work, I want it to work for me. He was standing there going, I do want it to work. He told himself he was a success, he was a dedicated Eved. He told himself he was committed to the agenda of his master, and lied to himself or buried his own hidden mission somewhere in his subconscious in a place where he himself wasn't aware of it. So when Avram Avinu told Eliezer, your daughter cannot marry my son, you are cursed and I'm blessed, consciously Eliezer didn't understand why Avram Avinu had the need to even say that. He felt no need. When does Eliezer realize, when does Eliezer's ulterior motive emerge from his own subconscious into his own state of consciousness? When does he himself chap that he's trying to sabotage the mission? Only when he starts talking about it. Only when he sits Rivka's family down around the table and starts to tell them the whole story about his own conversation with Avraham Avinu and tells them the story exactly what happened. As he's talking about it, the realization dawns upon him, oh my God, I actually have an ulterior motive here. Oh my God, I'm conflicted in myself about whether or not I want this to work. And a part of me is hoping it doesn't work. Oh my God, says Eliezer as he's sitting there talking to the family of Rivka, I've been lying to myself. I thought I was loyal. I thought I was dedicated. I thought I was going to toe the party line. Turns out, somewhere deep inside of me, there's a little devil that's trying to wreck the whole thing. But this is the genius of the Kotzker Rebbe. He says, but he only realized that, when he verbalizes the story, because Only then does he say, Vayomer Aladoni, says Eliezer, as he's repeating the story, Ulai, and as he says the word Ulai, the Torah drops the Vav. Because that's where the realization hits, where he realizes that he's hinting to something which he missed. Avraham Avinu caught it. Avraham Avinu said no. But Avraham said no to a question that Eliezer himself hadn't verbalized within himself. And so the Kotzker Rebbe says that's why the Torah drops the Vav when Eliezer repeats the story. On a very practical level, the insight of the Kotzker Rebbe is so powerful because, in today's day and age, they call this idea, they call it talk therapy. So talk therapy means a lot of things, but one of the things that it means is that when a person is forced to articulate their own thoughts, when a person is forced to articulate their own feelings and emotions, they make discoveries about their own process that they themselves were not fully self-aware of. And it's a sobering experience where you turn around one day and go, oh my God, I've been lying to myself about what it is that I really want. I've been lying to myself about who to blame for this, that, and the other. It's a startling realization. When the wool is pulled off from your eyes one day and you realize, actually, I haven't been fully honest with myself. And this is a scary thing. So how do I know if I'm being honest with myself right now? So one of the ways to engage in this process and to constantly make sure that I'm being honest with myself is to talk about it. In the right place, at the right time, in the right context, etc. The act somehow, you can ask why, it's a good question, but somehow the act of talking something through helps a person discover things that they didn't fully realize within themselves until they said it. Teachers, by the way, will often tell you that when they teach things, number one, they gain a much deeper understanding of what they're teaching as they're explaining it. And number two, new ideas, new depths of understanding in the concept that they're explaining come to them as they're presenting it. And if they never would have presented it, they never would have thought of it. The Gemara calls this mitalmida yosim mikulam. From my students, I learned more than from anybody else, even more than my teachers. And it's not just because the students ask good questions. It's because the act of teaching, the act of presenting and explaining deepens the person's own understanding and perception of what they're saying. In this case, says the Kotzker Rebbe, Eliezer being forced to tell the whole story to the family makes the penny drop, and he realizes what it is that's going on. What it is that's going on inside his head, and what it is that he really wants. Okay. One more explanation. Why does the Torah decide to drop the Vav? Why the Elai? Not when the story happens, but only when Eliezer repeats the story to the family of Avraham Avinu. Okay. Last explanation. Here it is. I think it's true to say that in life in general, we face two types of challenges. Two types of obstacles get in our way and threaten us. One is the obstacle of darkness. One is the obstacle of failure, of disappointment. One is the obstacle of lo yaleinu, poverty, or illness, Rachmana litzlan, may Hashem protect us, or all sorts of disasters that befall a person in life, creating these blockages, creating these challenges, creating these obstacles that we have to get through and we have to climb over, sometimes with tremendous, tremendous difficulty. If we even can, sometimes we can't. That's one type. But then, my friends, when it comes to spirituality, when it comes to being connected to Hashem and serving Hashem, there's another type of obstacle that comes our way. And that is success, wealth, physical wealth, spiritual wealth. Another type of obstacle is, what about when you wake up in the morning and everything goes great. Well, you think to yourself, well, what's the problem with that? There's a terrible, painful, and bitter challenge that comes along with that. And you know what it is? It's complacency and arrogance. Complacency and arrogance can be more dangerous than spiritually than poverty and illness. May Hashem protect us. Right? The great Rebbe once said, if poverty is a challenge and wealth is a challenge, if either way it's a challenge, I'd rather take the challenge of wealth. At least, if either way I'm challenged, at least in the meanwhile, let me enjoy it, let me have the money. I can do good things with it. But let's not kid ourselves. Either side is a challenge, and either side is an obstacle. In Jewish history, we've seen this in a way which is hair-raisingly scary. Ironically, or terribly painfully ironically, Jews often did better spiritually when they suffered and when they were persecuted than when they were given all the freedom and liberty in the world. We often in our history, we did really well when we were faced with darkness. We did really well when Rahman al-Islam, a gun was put to our head and we were told to give up our lives for the sake of our belief in Hashem. We stood there and we said, we're Jews and we were born Jews and we'll live as Jews our entire lives. But often not as well when things go well for us, when we're successful and when we're comfortable. And when we look at ourselves and everything about us is in our lives is Baruch Hashem working and we're doing well. We're successful, we're achieving. It's a terrible, terrible nisoyan, terrible test that emerges, that rears its ugly head right there. And that's the one of arrogance. We let it get to our heads. And that can be, may Hashem protect us, the cause of a terrible spiritual downfall. Why am I saying this? Eliezer is a slave. He's not a slave the way we understand slaves today, but he's dedicated his life to serving Avraham Avinu. Eved Avraham. He's an Eved of Avraham. And here he's sent to get a shidduch for Rivka. And Hashem works miracles through him. Amazing. And of all the women that come out, he finds the right one. He asks her for water. She gives it to him. She gives it to his camels. Boom, he lands the right one first time. Not to mention that he did a 10-day journey in one day. The Gemara says he had kfitzas haderech. He had miraculous experiences. And at this moment, when Eliezer sits down after his mission is so incredibly successful, and Hashem has blessed him with facilitating the shidduch that will father the entire Jewish nation for thousands of years. He's done it with his two hands. The word that comes out of his mouth is Eli. He sees himself now. He feels himself. He's being challenged with the test of success. And he fails. Turns out Eliezer is a fantastic servant during wartime. When he needs to get up there and battle the four kings and risk his life, he'll throw his life at the mercy of Avraham Avinu and they'll win the war. When there's a war raging, Eliezer is ready to put his neck on the line for Avraham Avinu. And when everything works out beautifully and the 10-day journey happens in one moment, and Hashem answers his prayer, and he's literally with his two hands, he's putting together the shidduch that the Torah spares no detail to tell us about. There's a sense of self that emerges. Eved Avraham, he says, Anoichi. Eved Avram, he refers to himself as Anoichi. You know that famous Torah of the Baal Shem Tov? Later on, in Chumash Devarim, there's a pasuk that says, Moshe Rabbeinu tells the Jews, Anoichi oimed bein Hashem uveinechem. Moshe tells the Jews, at the time of the giving of the Torah, I, Moshe, stood between you and Hashem, said the Baal Shem Tov. Anoichi, the arrogance of a person, the sense of I, the sense of self, the taking credit when credit is not yours. Oimed bein Hashem uveinechem. That gets in the way between you and Hashem. Eved Avraham, says Eliezer, Anoichi. When I was in yeshiva, I heard a beautiful, really pointed analogy for this idea. If I've shared it with you before, bear with me. A king, I was told, a monarch, a real emperor, a ruler, has servants for everything. There's a servant to cook his meals. There's a servant to choose his clothing. There's a servant to make his clothing. There's an individual in charge of making his bed and choosing his linen. There's an individual in charge of choosing his meals and his schedule and coordinating and arranging every aspect of the king's life. Has a servant, has an eved, has an officer that's in charge of this particular detail of the king so that it is carried out to perfection in the maximum possible way. For everything, for everything, the king has an eved. The king has an appointed person, minister of agriculture, a minister of politics, and a minister of advisors, a minister of chairs and tables and shmatas and everything. There's only one exception, the legend goes, that the king doesn't allow anybody else to do. Even, by the way, even in the good old times, nowadays there's an expression. When a person goes to the restroom, you'll excuse me, they say, we're going to a place where, lahavdil, the king goes alone. But it's not historically correct. Once upon a time, in the good old days, when the king would go to the bathroom, there was somebody who was, you'll forgive me, there was somebody who would go with the king, who was in charge of the king's hygiene. In the most private places. For everything, there's an eved. Only one exception, I'll tell you what it is. At night, when the king goes to sleep, after he puts on the appointed pajamas by the minister of pajamas and lies down in bed by the minister of bed, in the linen by the minister of linen, washed by the laundry minister of laundry, the last thing the king does at night is he removes the crown from his own head. You see, he can't sleep in a crown. The first thing the king does in the morning when he wakes up is he puts the crown back on his head. Stelzach the Shaila, the question is, who is going to hold the king's crown for the entire night? Who is going to be the lucky eved? Who's going to be the lucky servant, slave, minister, individual, human being who will be entrusted with the very icon and emblem of the king's royalty and all it represents, the crown itself, for those couple of hours that the king sleeps? You know what the answer is? The king gives it to nobody. So where does it sit? On a nail in the wall. Right above the king's bed, there's a nail. And on that nail, the king hangs his crown and goes to sleep. There's somebody in charge of watching the crown. There's somebody in charge of protecting the crown. But nobody holds it. Why? Isn't that disrespectful? If the king's got somebody in charge of everything, why not have somebody hold the king's crown for those couple of hours that the king sleeps? Somebody should be in charge of holding it. No! A nail in the wall. Why? Simple, my rabbis taught me. You know why? Because any human being who will hold the king's crown for 6 hours, at some point during the night will be unable to resist the temptation, and they'll put it on their own head while the king sleeps. And then they'll admire themselves in the mirror and maybe take a little walk around and get into the habit of holding the crown on their own head. And you know what happens when a commoner holds the king's crown on his head for too long? Eventually he decides that he's the king and the king is a commoner. Eventually he anoints and knights himself psychologically and decides, Eved Avram Anoichi, it's me. I'm the one who holds the king's crown. and he'll start thinking of himself as the king. And it'll become more and more difficult for him to return the crown to the king when the king wakes up in the morning. The king says, with this crown, I trust nobody. In Yiddish, we say, mit des Legen auf dem Kopf von der Schwok, which means we'll hang the crown on the head of the nail in the wall. Und nicht auf den Kopf von der Eved, not on the head of a servant. Because the nail in the wall will never decide that he's the king. The nail in the wall will never decide that it's about himself. He'll never go through an identity crisis, never take the credit, and never say, Eved Avraham Anochi, I'm the nail in the wall. No. The king has nothing to fear. And so the nail holds the crown all night. And this becomes the final explanation of what it is that's going on here. Eliezer was an amazing human being. Dedicated his entire life. Literally served Avraham Avinu, taught his Torah to the whole world, risked his life, carried out amazing miracles. Hashem's hand worked through Eliezer in miraculous ways. And when it did, there was a sense of ego that crept in. Eli, says Eliezer as he repeats the story, to me, Eli, me, my daughter, I want it for me. And Avraham Avinu anticipated all of this. And so he said to Eliezer, my son is not going to marry your daughter because you, my very dear servant, you, my very entrusted servant, you have a curse. And that curse is arrogance. And yes, you've accomplished amazing things. But the most difficult challenge of them all, the challenge of success, when Hashem works open and revealed miracles to you, through you, and you are carrying the crown of the king, you are producing the shidduch that will be responsible for the very existence of Klal Yisrael. When you need to be as humble as a nail in a wall holding the king's crown, at that moment you will fail. And you will look and you will say, Eli, some credit is given to me too. Look what I did. And that for Klal Yisrael is not sufficient. Because the secret of the existence and the survival of Klal Yisrael for thousands of years will be that no matter what happens, they will always remember who they are. And they'll always remember V'HaKadosh Baruch Hu Matzileinu Miyodam, Hashem saves us from their hands. They will always remember that as Jews, we are a miraculous existence placed here and perpetuated here by Hashem. And they'll never let it get to our head. We'll never let it get to our head. And so no, Avraham Avinu wasn't being disparaging. He wasn't cursing his servant. He was explaining to him why it is that the future of Klal Yisrael cannot come through him. There's a quality we seek. There's a humility. There's an neshama, which is so deep and so powerful that it can overcome every challenge. And even success will not get to its head. I have 60 seconds left, and I want to say this. I'm sure you've all been reading over the past week many of the tributes that have been written and that have been said about the late Rabbi Jonathan Sacks, the chief rabbi of the United Kingdom. And all the things people wrote about him. He was, in many ways, a celebrity rabbi. He was excuse me. An inspirational man, a man who touched the lives of many people, and a person you could say, without a moment's hesitation, experienced tremendous success his writings, his teachings, his ability to defend Klal Yisrael, his ability to stand up and speak about anti-Semitism and call it what it is, his ability to encourage Jews to be strong and proud and hold their heads high. He experienced tremendous, tremendous success. Rabbi Jonathan Sacks doesn't need me to give him another hesped, but I will say this. One of the many, many things that touched me about him is that no matter how much success he had, and no matter how many books he wrote and how many articles he wrote, and with time it just got bigger and bigger, and his videos on YouTube are watched millions and millions of times, he always came across as more and more humble. He never took the credit for himself. He wasn't an individual holding the crown of the king, putting it on his own head, admiring his own reflection, wondering if he's all that. It was never Eved Avraham, Onoichi, I. Like the nail in the wall, he always saw himself as a servant of the public and a humble individual who's been entrusted by Hashem. He called himself a person upon whom greatness was thrust. And I think that may be the single quality that distinguishes him above all. Because many people accomplish great things, but very few are able to emerge like that, the way he did. Never taking the credit, never getting up there and making it about himself, never cleverly telling stories designed for people to walk away thinking how amazing he was. He was a servant of the public, a Torah teacher, a humble Torah teacher, a real bona fide mensch. And in that way, he made his mark in ways that very few people, in ways that very few others on that level are able to do. May his neshama have an aliyah, may the Kedoshim of Har Nov, whose yahrzeit is today, may their neshamas have an aliyah. May all of Klal Yisrael be blessed with Hatzlacha, with Gesund, with Nachas, with Yeshuas, and everything we need, and then more. And may we always remember the lesson, this lesson, that the humbler we are, the more we can make ourselves, the more we can create space within ourselves for that which is above us, the greater we become. If we can be as humble as the nail in the wall, then the king will truly put his crown upon our head. Have a wonderful Shabbos.